Can the BJP create history and replicate their 2016 performance in Assam? Hi, I'm Aarti Subramanian and you're joining me on Explained. Also with us is Tanvi Shukla, and we're going to look at a state which has been a little overshadowed by all the drama that's happening in West Bengal.
Well, I'll blame it on the BJP and the big guns and Mamata Banerjee. There's so much of entertainment and masala and action that's going on in West Bengal, then often Assam gets overshadowed in terms of the election conversations. But it's very important. It's a high-stakes battle for the national parties as well as several of the regional parties of Assam, which is why it's important for us to look into some of the key issues, key talking points, and how the history of Assam politics and the dynamics there really has changed, Aarti, especially since 2016.
Yeah, we are going to do a deep dive into Assam, and as Tanvi was saying, make no mistake about it, this is a very, very crucial election for the BJP, and we're going to tell you why. But before that, we need to just set the political context a bit in Assam, and nothing will tell you that story as much as this this map over here, how the political dynamics changed from 2011 to 2016. It was a sea of saffron, as you can see on that map, with these numbers, and these numbers are going to tell you the story of 2011 versus 2016.
Correct. So the colors tell you the one story. We're going to now break it down into numbers as well and see what happened in 2011 versus what happened in 2016. And if you look at the number of seats that Congress party got in 2011 were about 78 seats, and BJP had just about 5 seats in 2011. Cut to 5 years later, and look at the difference there. BJP's vote share has shot up to 30%.
Yeah.
And they've managed to win 60 seats. And Aarti, of course, several of the other important players, the AGP and the AIUDF, and of course the Bodoland party front, all three of them will be important this election as well.
That is true. And as Tanvi was just taking us through the numbers, see the difference between the Congress in 2011 and 2016. It was the crumbling of the Congress citadel in many ways, which is why it was such a landmark election. 2016 really was a landmark in Assam's history and in the BJP's history, because here is a party that has been a non-entity in Assam's political history.
Yes, and Congress was in power for 15 long years, and then it was decimated. BJP came out for the first time with so many seats. This was also their entry to the Northeast, and they had this entire strategy of winning more and more Northeastern states. They've actually managed to do that,
True.
with alliances and with a lot of other political strategies at play. But Assam was really the turning point for BJP and their entry into Northeast.
It was a concerted effort because they had this look east policy. They wanted to expand their electoral presence in the Northeast, and Assam was the first elected BJP government. So it was a landmark for them. Before that, the BJP barely had a presence, as I was saying. They won 10 seats, and the highest vote share was about 12% in 2006. So this was their big splash in Assam. But is 2021 going to be different for them?
Well, that's the big question, and we will start off with, some of the factors that will change these dynamics. For example, the alliances have changed both for the BJP and the Congress party. The Congress party has actually formed now a grand alliance, a pattern we are seeing in a lot more states where they want to take on the BJP. Here they formed a grand alliance where they brought in the AIUDF, several of the smaller parties as well, and they're going to try and take on the BJP. The BJP's own partnerships have also now changed, Aarti.
Well, that's right. The Bodoland People's Front, which was a crucial ally of the BJP, has now gone over to the other side. They've switched alliances. We'll have to see how that's going to play out. In fact, the BJP is also allied with a smaller party, UPPL, to make up for those votes. But again, the alliances and the political landscape has changed as a result of these shifting loyalties. But the other big issue in Assam has been CAA and NRC. Now, while we've heard the Congress talk about CAA over and over again in their rallies, promising that there's going to be no implementation of it, the BJP, on the other hand, has been rather silent about this issue. Whenever asked, the Home Minister says that we're going to look at it after vaccination, the vaccination process ends.
Yes, well, let's put also this in perspective with some amount of history and recent history. The fact that the way people of Assam look at CAA, and especially the ones who've been protesting so much, is very different from how the rest of the country really looks at CAA. For the rest of the country, it's about, the divide and the disagreement is really on the religious lines, whether you should be allowing only one religion people to come from only a handful of nations, and why not the others, and that's largely been, the point of contention. In Assam, it's not about religion, and that's not where the divide is. It's actually about insiders versus outsiders. So the people of Assam are actually saying they're fed up with illegal immigrants and refugees coming from all across multiple nations and taking their land, destroying their culture. So this is more about the indigenous tribes and the people of Assam, which is why more than any other part of the country, the anti-CAA protests were violent and the fiercest in the state of Assam. Even before, Aarti, the bill was brought into the parliament and it became a law. Even before that, we had seen spurts of these, protests taking place in Assam.
That is true. And almost complementary to that have also been the NRC. Now, we've seen protests across the country saying we don't want any NRC. But in Assam, the situation is very different. They want that, the NRC is so crucial to their politics. They want to keep, as Tanvi was saying, outsiders away. They want to keep what they say infiltrators away. And very crucial to that was the NRC. But it didn't exactly pan out the way they wanted, because 19 lakh people were excluded from the final national registry, and there was something that upset even the BJP, because the kind of names that they were expecting on that list didn't make it.
Yeah, so those who they didn't want made it to the list, and some who were supposed to be there were not in the list, and that's why the entire controversy. So these are the two sore points with the people of Assam. What remains to be seen is whether there will be enough for many of the BJP supporters of 2016 to actually move away from this party and go back to the Congress fold and vote for the Congress party or AIUDF, together as that alliance. So that's going to be one interesting thing.
Well, you spoke of the Congress. Well, they are the ones who are actually also seizing on the CAA narrative. They've come out with a 5 guarantee scheme. Two of those, I want to mention just two of those are extremely significant. One of them is for tea workers, and I'll tell you why that's important in just a bit. But the other is saying that there is going to be no CAA implementation in the state. It's something that you'll hear Rahul Gandhi say in virtually every rally. It's something that the BJP, though, is saying very confidently that is not going to play out electorally. But for the BJP, they have a little bit of another problem besides the CAA, and that is playing out rather subtly, though, in the state.
Yes, absolutely. And so we've been talking about CAA and the NRC, but for the BJP, there is also a problem in-house. And that's the fact that they have two big faces. Subramanian Sonowal, the chief minister, who was earlier part of the AGP, now part of the BJP and their chief minister. And then there is Himanta Biswa Sarma, again, a big name in Assam politics, who shifted to the BJP before the last state elections from the Congress party. And he seems to be actually getting a lot more attention, in the Assam political environment.
He's been more visible. Yeah. He's been more vocal than the CM. And Himanta Biswa Sarma is a very interesting character because he's a larger-than-life figure, not just in Assam, but in the Northeast itself. He's been given very important tasks. He's almost the point person for the BJP in the Northeast. And what's interesting is he's managed to maintain this larger-than-life figure in a party like the BJP, where you don't often see that happen. So for the BJP, there is a slight tussle that's happening, but for the Congress, it's a different problem.
Well, BJP doesn't have a CM face. Neither does the Congress party in a sense. They don't even have a big leader anymore. Congress is definitely going to be feeling the absence of Tarun Gogoi, a multi-term chief minister that they had, who's no more now, a big stalwart in Assam politics for the Congress party. Really the name that pulled in, a lot for this party is missing from the picture, and that vacuum hasn't been filled by any big Assam leader for the Congress party, Aarti. So that's going to be one of the other interesting factors.
How is all of this? Yeah, how is all of this going to play out, though, in the first phase of polling? Well, the first phase of polling, and let me just give you a sense of what happened in these seats that are going to polls in 2016. Now, 47 seats are going to go to polls in the first phase, and in 2016, here's how they performed. The BJP won 27 of those seats. The AJP won 8 seats. The Congress won 9, and the AIUDF won 2 seats. So the numbers that the BJP came, this entire region powered the BJP's victory in 2016, and that's why this particular phase is so important, because they need to replicate that in these seats.
Yes, so somewhat of central, but a lot of the North Assam is what goes to play here. Now, why is this phase really important? The fact is, like you said, that this was the region that really pushed the BJP and got them this victory. They got a large majority of their seats from here. Between them and their allies, they had about 35 of the 47 seats. But it's not just that, Aarti. Why it's also important is that this is home to the large tea plantations of Assam and those workers, as well as the indigenous tribes. So here comes the other important aspect that you were touching upon earlier, is what they want, their demands, and how actually both the leading parties have been reaching out to this vote bank.
Well, true. The BJP and the Congress have been actively wooing them. I earlier mentioned the Congress's 5 guarantee scheme. One of that is to increase the wages of tea plantation workers. They're saying we're going to give you 365 rupees as daily wages. The BJP, on the eve of the elections, had made a similar promise, but that was caught in legalese. It was challenged by tea plantation association owners. The matter is now stuck in court. But very interestingly, Tanvi, the Prime Minister raised in his speeches in Assam the issue of this toolkit, the toolkit that Greta Thunberg tweeted, and its references to tea in that.
Yes, he made that mention, and he also said, who better understands your pain than me, a chai wala. So he is also trying to draw that emotional link, saying, I'm a chai wala, I understand what your pain is. And he's not the only one. You know, very clearly steps have been taken even by the Congress party. Priyanka Gandhi went there. She spent a couple of days in this region, you know, in the tea plantations. Those visuals came about. She spent time with the women who work on these plantations, the workers. And of course, their big promise is to bring about a better life and higher wages for them. So that's one key issue in this region. The, of course, Aarti, the second one, of course, being the anti-CAA.
Yes, in this particular region, it was in many ways the epicenter of the anti-CAA protest, because it's home to a number of indigenous tribes as well. And Tanvi was explaining this earlier, that it's a question of insiders and outsiders. It's a question of cultural heritage. And these people fear, of course, that with the with the entrance of outsiders, their culture stands threatened. So it saw massive anti-CAA protests in this particular area. And we have to see, given those protests, does it dent the BJP's performance here? Because if they don't perform well here, it's going to drag them down in the rest of the state. But that's as far as the importance of this phase is concerned. But there are always these little X factors that could play an important role.
In every election, in any phase, our favorite is the X factor, what could really also be key to an election. And one of the X factors, Aarti, will be, of course, the Bodoland People's Front. At one point of time, an extremely big, organization, and the biggest of the talking points that really defined what was going on in Assam. They now still play a key role, and it will be interesting to see how their shift to the Congress party and the Grand Alliance is really going to help, and whether the Congress party and the Grand Alliance is actually able to draw in some of the BPF's earlier support.
True, because they do have a presence in this area as well. So how that shift plays out will be seen. There are 2 other parties in the fray which were born out of the anti-CAA movement. And that also could play a crucial factor. We don't know whether it's going to cut the BJP's votes, or it is going to cut the anti-BJP votes, but these 2 parties are also interesting.
Yes, absolutely. So there are 2 parties, the Jatiya Parishad, the Assam Jatiya Parishad, and the Roy Jor Dal, that have actually now, in the run-up to these elections, come about. Like Aarti said, on the anti-CAA plank, there are also a lot to do about the indigenous pride, about the Assam pride. So either they could damage the Grand Alliance's fortunes, because they are, also talking about anti-CAA as a promise, or they could also damage a little bit on the AGP side, AGP with the BJP, but AGP also talks a lot about Assam pride and what they want to do for the people there. So it will be interesting if these 2 new parties, relatively smaller parties, are actually able to do something, especially in phase 1.
Well, and one of the key candidates from that party is a man by the name of Akhil Gogoi, extremely interesting character who is currently in jail.
Yes, Akhil Gogoi, an RTI activist who then also, campaigned and crusaded against corruption, and then became one of the big faces in the anti-CAA protests that took place in Assam. is in jail. Ever since those protests took place, he's been charged for sedition and under the UAPA law, but he is contesting these elections now. It is unclear, and the views are divided about whether he will be able to make a big dent. Of course, during the protests and the violence and everything that was unfolding at that time in Assam a couple of years ago, he was a big personality, but politically speaking, will he be able to make a mark remains to be seen, Aarti.
Well, another person who's going to face the electorate is the Chief Minister himself. Like we were talking about earlier, he's been on the sidelines a bit, but he needs this win, and perhaps then he can burnish his credentials a little more to stake claim once again if the BJP comes to power. Can the BJP come to power? That's the big question. And will this phase really determine how they perform? Is this phase going to drag them down? Is this phase going to power another term for the BJP? We'll find out on the 2nd of May.